Hi, my name is Naishali. I go by she, her pronouns.
Laurel, she, her pronouns.
Anook, she, her pronouns.
Being he, him pronouns.
And this week we're going to be talking about the 1993 film The Piano, and its themes related to the male gaze and patriarchal standards and feminism and female liberation, but through a discussion of kind of the film cinematography and its contents. So if anybody wants to start off.
Well, within the film, it's very prominent the fact that the two main male characters, they have this power over everybody who's around them. I mean, even when we first see Ada and her daughter arrive at the beach and they come down with their men, the native people are dressed in their clothing type. They're forcing their norms upon the native people of the land that they're taking over, and then they start to force their societal norms upon um, the adopted daughter and the man's new wife.
Yeah, I think that first scene on the beach, like the one that we discussed in class, is like really just full of content that can relate to this kind of idea of patriarchal oppression, because that's really like Ada's overarching struggle, is trying to like liberate herself and trying to find freedom and peace and even, I guess, love within these kind of constraints that hold her, whether it be like her muteness or not having her piano or like the men in her life abusing her. And I think that the thing that stuck out to me the most in relation to this kind of idea of patriarchal oppression was the way in which Stuart, her husband, refused to bring the piano, which was clearly the most important object to her on that beach. He refused to bring it over like the silverware and the clothing and the dowry. So he viewed her as an object, and he expressed that through choosing the material things and choosing the things that would benefit him over the thing that she expressed to be her most important object and the source of like her joy. So that was like, I think that really like set the tone, because that's really the first time we get Stuart's character besides that scene in the woods where he's brushing his hair in her picture, which just further pushes that kind of idea of like he's using Ada as a tool to like better himself, but not in like a good way, and like he's using her as a tool, as an object. So like that kind of introduction to Stuart really set the whole, because like of course him and Baines are tumultuous characters in her life, but I would argue that Stuart was by far like the worst depiction of patriarchal oppression upon her.
Yeah, even with the piano, it's the only time we see her really express her emotions besides her daughter translating for her. But the piano is like the main one that she goes to, and by taking that away from her, she has no way to express herself. Like even with the music she plays, it's never happy music. It's always like sorrowful and like serious. And when he takes that piano away from her, she's even less of a person to herself and to him.
Yeah, the piano, like it's solidified that she's mute, like she doesn't speak, but she does speak when she's playing the piano. Like she's able to express how she feels and what she thinks in the moment through her piano, and that was immediately stripped from her by her husband. And that prop, as like in itself, is a metaphorical prop, to use the term, but it really does represent her freedom that was immediately taken away by a man the second that she stepped on the island, or New Zealand, I think is where the movie is set.
Yeah. So you make good points, and the scene that you brought up, I was writing about it, and I was writing about it as well as so it's the scene of what's his name, Stuart? Sorry. Stuart, yeah, looking at the picture of Ada, and then the scene of Baines under the piano, which is like an extreme close-up, definitely an extreme close-up of her leg, I believe. I think it might have also been an extreme close-up of his face as well under the piano. And so like in the reading that and Laura Mulvey's reading, it's this big theme about how cinema satisfies voyeurism and how women are representative of male desire. And so like in these two different scenes with two different characters, two different relationships to Ada, if you guys remember these scenes, what are like maybe some other things like mise-en-scène or cinematography wise that you recall from these scenes that could contribute to this argument of the male gaze?
Specifically, like it's a little bit removed from the idea of the male gaze, but with well, it is connected with that very close up shot of her leg with the hole in the stocking. And we just see his hand, or like his fingers, like around it. His nail beds are very dirty, and that like kind of connects to the fact that it's okay if men aren't seen as pure, but with women, it has to be like, even in today's society, there are still people that fully believe that women need to be like untouched by a man to even have any worth, and it was even more prevalent in that day. So she, even though she has a hole in her stocking, it kind of represents that he would go on to corrupt her in a sense. But he's already not pure.
Right. And also the hole in her stocking could kind of be representative of, you know, the hole in her stocking is definitely, it's not like she like cut it open. It's definitely like she got it by accident, but it could be representative of the way that, you know, when I saw that scene, I felt like uncomfortable of the way that he was like touching her, because it just felt intrusive, and it kind of like so many things in that scene, it seemed to kind of, that hole seemed to represent how maybe like with women, like any kind of opportunity to seize their skin or like get, you know, get in their clothes or like whatever it is so like, it was like an extreme close-up. It was like a really intense moment for Baines to like have that interaction.
Yeah, and I think that whole hole in her stocking scene is like, and her whole kind of beginning of her relationship with Baines and with Stuart is like, Ada is really seen as like an object, and her clothing, like the clothing of the time, like this was set in the Victorian era, so it was very restricting. You had like the corset and the hoop skirt, and then you had all the layers. Like women were very, they were covered up, and they were forced to kind of hide themselves away for the sake of kind of maintaining their purity, or like for the men in their life. And then she was kind of held back by her clothing. Like it felt like it was like swallowing her whole. And then when Baines crawls under the piano and then sees the hole in her stocking, it's kind of him breaking that kind of that constraint that the clothes are trying to have to like hide her away from the world, because he's breaking through and like having this level, having this connection, and having this this moment with her that like I guess the clothes are trying to prevent, if that makes sense. Like he's kind, I don't want to say like corrupting her, but like the clothes represent this sense of purity, and then he sees this hole in the stocking as kind of his way in.
Yeah. How do you guys interpret that that Ada felt about that moment? And
well, I believe this was before she like was fully like willingly involved with him. She's clearly uncomfortable, and he proceeds to ask even more from her. He asks her to take her shirt off, and as she plays the piano, she begins to play it more violently, expressing that she is unhappy with what's happening. She's uncomfortable, but he completely disregards that fact.
I think
I
what's
also
interesting
think
about
that, sorry, you go.
I think what's interesting about the clothes, and also the fact that she was prevented from bringing piano initially, is that a lot of the clothes are like extra. You don't, there's articles of clothing that you wouldn't need, like specifically she has a parasol at the beginning. That's just completely unnecessary, and kind of shows she needed to conform to the norm of the times rather than what she wanted.
Yeah, I think there's also like so many examples of her clothing kind of like even though like the corset and then the hoop skirt were like, and just clothing as a whole for Victorian women were seen as like another example of like oppression through the patriarchy. Her clothes, I noticed, kind of represented, I guess, how she felt, because in the scene in which Bane takes her and Flora to the beach for her to play her piano, she's wearing this warm red dress. And she's obviously, she feels that liberation that she gets from playing the piano, because she is kind of stuck in her own world, being mute and being unheard by the world. And then she plays the piano, and then she feels as if she can like release that. But when Bane cuts off their agreement, but Ada's already fallen for him, she's wearing a black dress. So even though she's gotten her piano back, that joy and that liberation that she felt by playing it has kind of been tarnished by the sexual coercion that Bane's tied to it. So it's not only kind of a death of something that she once enjoyed, but it's also a removal of like her chance to consistently meet with this guy who she's fallen in love with. So her clothing really does represent like her as a woman trying to feel independent in the world, as seen through like the warmness of the dress, and then that moment with her playing the piano, but also like her ties to these men and what they do to her, and how that's kind of conveyed through her appearance. Because in the scene with the wedding dress and they're taking the picture, it's raining heavily, and she's like, that's obviously symbolic of her emotions in the moment, and she has this beautiful lacy dress that's been ruined by the rain, which is kind of like, you have this woman who makes beautiful music, who wants to be heard, but then it's kind of weighed down by something greater than herself.
Yeah, also not to mention that like she's mute, so her clothes make that much more of an expression for her.
Mm-hmm. Continuing with this kind of idea of how her clothes represent her, I think it would be, important to talk about the scene where she asks Baines to throw the piano overboard, and she ends up getting also pulled into the ocean by the rope that's tied to her foot. So does anyone have any thoughts about that scene? Because I feel like that was just like a big turning point in Ada's story as a whole, but also in like the overall message of the film.
I'm just trying to find my notes from that scene real quick.
I mean, obviously the main implication is that piano is the extension of her body. That's how she speaks to others.
Mm-hmm.
And if she loses the piano, she loses her livelihood.
Mm.
And I think that's what that's trying to show.
Yeah, that makes a good point. Also, something that just occurred to me is like her like having her fingers chopped off, like that wasn't her turning point. Like, you know what I mean? Like that wasn't the thing that was the catalyst for her death. You know, it was something that wasn't, it kind of speaks to like her life is kind of deeper than like the physical world. You know, it's so connected to this piano that the piano is what is symbolic of her life. You know, she can handle having fingers chopped off. That doesn't take her away from the piano. So that's just something that just occurred as well. But thinking of how this like relates to feminism is like a much bigger question.
I think that the piano itself is kind of this metaphorical prop of like her wanting to exist in the world as on her own terms. So kind of choosing not to speak to other people, of course, is something that holds her back, but also gives her this kind of weird sense of control. But also the piano itself is her way of like connecting to the world, and like even though her husband begs her to speak, she kind of stands on her own, but the piano is her voice, right? And oh my god, I just had a thought. And then like feminism as a whole, she's of course trying to break free from these men who are trying to control her. But I think like how we see with a lot of women in like even today's society, it's really hard for them to exist within their passions without the influence of the patriarchy. I think that's the best way to put it. Like she's trying to buy back her autonomy, and she's trying to buy back her freedom, and she's only able to do the thing that she loves most in the world under the conditions of the men in her life, because she's only able to get it back because Stuart agrees to trade the land with Baines, and she's only able to play it if she trades sexual favors. So it's like, I'm sure you guys have heard that like joke on the internet, or like that comment where like, find me one thing that a girl likes that she won't be made fun of for. I think it's kind of the same idea where like, find me one thing that a woman can do completely separate from like male influence.
Oh, that just reminded me. Throughout the entire film, like I said before, all the music she plays, it's sorrowful, it's depressing, it's how she expresses herself. And it does kind of raise the question of, has Ada ever actually felt happiness? Has she ever felt happiness within herself and been able to feel that like liberation, at least within mentally, from feeling like she needs to depend on a man? Her daughter, when asked by Stuart to play a jig, like a happier song, she turns to Ada and says, "Do I know any of those?" And she's left with no response. And even by the end of the film, she doesn't play any kind of like joyous music. And when she lets go of the piano, I basically viewed it as she's just succumbing to the control of this man, and she feels like that's her only way to keep living. And she just like accepted the fact that that was her situation in life within that day's society.
Yeah, I think throwing the piano into the ocean was definitely a way of, even though that this piano was like a symbol of her voice and her way of expressing her freedom, throwing it into the ocean was a way of like being able to free herself from all of the baggage that she and all like the trauma that she acquired because of the piano and because of what ended up happening during, you know, her marriage and her time with Baines. And it was a way of kind of Ada being in control, and it was also a way of her, initially she plunged herself into the ocean with the idea that she was going to die, so it was a way of her kind of existing on her own terms, and I guess a way of her dying on her own terms, which in a way is like, if I can choose how I die on my own terms, then I'm kind of taking control of this life that's kind of been thrown into like chaos and thrown like out of my hands completely. And also like the whole shoe, like the way that I think I mentioned earlier, her clothes were a symbol of constraint, and then she like she takes off her shoe and floats to the top, which is kind of freedom from that.
So
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, so I don't know if we like if this is considered off topic, but so like to compare, you know, how the film lenses on Ada versus on like the Maori women. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. So, what are your guys' thoughts on how the film kind of in the lens of the male gaze would, or you know, this is made by a woman, so I don't. So that's also a question we could talk about. Is like, you know, is she trying to write this through a male gaze? But the question I was asking was, you know, how is Ada depicted versus the Maori woman? And, you know, how does that relate to this whole concept?
I had a hard time determining what like the intent was for the Maori, because they were kind of depicted as like primitive but free, and I don't know if that was supposed to be a bash on them or if it was supposed to add to the story or what.
I don't know in terms of like, oh sorry.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say like it. Did you want to go?
No, go. It's
okay. I was gonna say it does like raise the question of, is the director trying to, were they actually not just representing Native people well, or were they trying through the cinematography trying to like show the male gaze through the way they shoot the film? The like with the coloring, all the scenes. So like within that day's idea of femininity, it has to do with like woman, their purity, and the fact that they could bear children. Like with the opening, one of the opening scenes, her and her daughter with the warm glow coming out of the hoop skirt, And all the shots within like the home, which was seen as like what the woman was supposed to take care of, and with her daughter are like these warm colored comforting shots, and everything outside and with the men was this more like cool tone color that doesn't feel as safe per se.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, like, I feel like, because that's really like the contrasts of like, like the idea of like femininity being pure versus, how it's depicted with the Maori women. But, it also could be like, Ada's see, again, it's hard to like really make this claim because this film was not written by a guy. But like, Ada's character could be, if this is commentary on the male gaze, Ada's character could be like kind of eroticized in the typical way that it's done in Hollywood film. And then for the, the Maori women and even the kids, or just, they were just kind of, there wasn't any sort of like, I don't know, there wasn't, I don't know how to explain it, like, you guys know how they were depicted, but there could be like a difference in that way.
I think that a point you made about Ada being sexualized and being kind of dehumanized in a sexual way is it definitely lends to like this idea of like male patriarchy, But for Laurel's point about the lighting, I noticed that of course, when like Stuart and the Maoris and Baines are initially walking through the woods and we see him comb his hair with her picture, it's a very dark, morose, blue tone scene, right? And then we have the scenes with her daughter and the scenes in her home, and even scenes with Baines that are kind of hued with red and with warmness. But there's the scenes where she's with Stuart that are lit very warmly, and I don't necessarily think that it's because it's within the home. Also because this is kind of a film focused on a woman not conforming to being what her husband wants her to be in terms of like a good wife and a good housewife. I think that like those scenes where she's with Stuart in the home and they're warm lighted, it's those sexual scenes where she is the one in control. She won't allow him to touch her, but she can do whatever she wants to his body. And I think that warmness kind of is symbolic of this freedom that she feels and this control that she feels and this like female empowerment and like sexual awakening, because sex was of course a taboo thing at the time, but to her kind of asserting that power over him as a way of, I think, gaining back some of the control that she lost to Baines, because he's kind of having this he's kind of holding her sexually hostage with her piano, is kind of like seen in that warm light that's contrasting to the blue, heavy, dark light that Stuart's usually seen in. Does anyone have any other comments about the cinematography, or maybe the shots, or anything about that concerning to feminism, or just maybe the film as a whole and how it contributed?
Yeah, there was that one shot. I don't have like a full constructed thought about it yet, but I believe it's after her daughter runs to George. George is his name. And she was wearing the like outfit from the play, but there's like white wings. There's just a quick shot of a man washing them in the river. Just I feel like there's something that could be elaborated within that shot. It was like very quick and kind of like doesn't really connect to the rest of the story where it was going, but it definitely had some kind of meaning to it.
So
if anybody else remembers.
I don't exactly. Are you talking about like, so I remember like the like wings that Flora was wearing, but are you talking about the shot of the Maori kids being washed?
No, this was at the end of the film. The
Oh, okay. I don't remember it.
Yeah, I can't say that.
I believe it was around the time where It was around when Stuart went into the house, into George's house, and was like, I wish this was all a dream and we woke up and none of this happened, that all of you were gone.
So it must
Is
have been a
that
really
after?
quick
Oh,
shot.
sorry. Is that
Yeah, it was like
after
3
she
seconds.
cuts her finger off? Is that
Yeah.
okay? So correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Flora wearing her fairy wings when she's sprayed with her mother's blood from her finger being cut off?
Yeah, it's after that.
So
It's kind of like between
yeah.
when they leave with George and the like
Mhm.
climax of Stuart being like, I just want y'all gone.
Yeah, so I don't remember the scene exactly. Like I don't know, maybe if I like watched it again, but if I'm correct and it's after Ada's finger is cut off, like Flora is wearing, correct me if I'm wrong, a white outfit with fairy wings and
Yes,
she's
that's correct.
sprayed with Ada's blood. And if there's a more clear-cut case of like symbolizing the loss of innocence, then I really don't know what it would be. But that kind of scene where like she's watching like of course her stepfather mutilate her mother, that's like traumatic for a kid, and then her clothing symbolizes that because she was once just like a child, but she's been kind of exposed to this like horrific event, and then them washing it. I don't really remember them washing the wings, but like them doing that is maybe symbolic of them leaving this nightmare life with Stuart behind, and like the repercussions of that, like them trying to get themselves away from that, because I would assume there would be Ada's blood on the wings, and that's why they're washing them if it happens after that scene. So Flora being this innocent child and then being exposed to what she was, and then them escaping Stuart with the woman her mother loves. I think that could be like a really, I guess, interesting connection that I didn't think of before.
Yeah. Like I remember like the like not so clear thought I had, it was like kind of like Flora's like childhood innocence being rewashed as they leave with George to start their new life together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like purity and like new beginnings, as corny as it sounds, like these white wings and like these white fairy wings, like this kind of youthful, like just pure thing that they're trying to regain. Like Ada and Bane's relationship, it started off as something dirty, and then they kind of are trying to rebuild it to be something pure and to be something real and kind of, like,
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be like a metaphorical prop as well as Flora's position as the child, and the wings. I remember seeing Flora wearing the wings pretty early on, initially just like running around the house playing, like warm lighting. And so like as the prop kind of holds the meaning that kind of like develops through the plot, like that, you definitely make a good point noticing that, because that definitely speaks to, like, that's definitely important prop in the movie for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up because it was, like I said, it wasn't really connected to the rest of what was going on, and we only ever see what seemed to be a man washing it, but there was no second shot of like a full body to like recapture that as somebody's. I would assume that it was George, but it doesn't really leave a lot of elaboration to it.
It was George washing Flora?
No, the wings. There's no shot to recapture that as somebody's point of view or action.
Oh, so okay, that changes my whole perspective, because I thought you were saying that there was just a shot of like some kids being washed, but if you're talking about the wings, that's like, yeah, that's definitely a good point.
I had another note about this about I guess the male gaze. That's what we were talking about. It was the scene where Stuart catches Ada playing the kitchen table, and he kind of has a conversation with, I think, like his head maid about how they think Ada might be slow and how they think that she might be like mentally unwell, and he can't fathom the kitchen table, this kind of symbol of like the center of the home and like family dinners and like domesticity, as being used to something other than that. Like Ada is obviously using the kitchen table in that moment to kind of regain some of that control, that freedom that she feels from playing the piano. and she's trying to regain that, and then he sees it and he can't imagine how she's not using it for the domestic purpose it's made for, and immediately writes her off as being slow and as being unwell, rather than, I guess, trying to understand his wife's actions, which is like this kind of grapple between like him and her in terms of like her trying to live her life and like find joy, and him wanting to push on this kind of like the role that she's supposed to have on her. So I was wondering if any of you had like any thoughts about that one scene.
The scene where he's complaining to the other two women that was with them,
Yeah.
that was also followed by the two native women in the house like singing, and they're like immediately shut down, which not only goes into like the dehumanization of what they did to the native people, but like they don't really even view them as one, but they still keep them as silent or repressed, if not worse than their own woman.
Yeah, of course. Does anyone else have?
There's a scene in the beginning I want to talk about. A part of what we watched in class. When uh, um, when Flora's translating Ada's sign, the man gets mad at Flora and not Ada for telling him off. And I think that's really interesting because they've kind of disregarded Ada as a person and only like recognize her as what she uses to translate. For example, the piano or the girl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just sorry. I made the mistake of recording in the practice rooms.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, she's definitely like objectified. I think like the question is like, what cues are we given in that scene? Like, what are the things in that scene that can lead to that interpretation, you know?
That's what I'm saying.
Oops, sorry.
Sorry.
I think that Brady had like this comment that you said that he gets mad at them because like Ada won't speak. Like obviously he's like upset with Flora because like I guess they like don't understand Ada's situation, and I like this happens a lot in the film where like people are upset with Ada for not speaking, or they talk behind her back about how they think that she's like mentally like not there because she doesn't speak, when in fact through the narration we know that she's completely aware and she's completely conscious of her actions and like her emotions. And I think that the way that they treat her because of her mutism is a way that like women were treated, like not just women who struggled in the same way Ada did, where like hysteria is literally like a word derived from like it isn't the like the root of the word like sorry, like hysterectomy has to do with like women and like the uterus, and then like hysteria was like only a women's disease, and they wrote like women's emotions off as being an illness or like a deficiency. And I think that people are doing that with Ada in this film as just another way to kind of, I guess, oppress her because she's not what they want her to be.
I get that is a good point, but I what I was trying to say is he gets mad at Flora for translating what Ada did instead of getting mad at Ada for what Ada said. If that makes any sense.
Well, with the daughter, her performance throughout the entire film, at least how I saw it was like, you don't really view her as a child. She talks like an adult and acts like an adult, and definitely has mannerisms that normal children her age wouldn't be acting like and speaking like. But it's like none of the adults really address that, and they kind of brush it off, which within like today's society, but even worse then, children are treated even below how women were treated, or at least in the same like range of that. So it was definitely interesting to see her daughter, like even with the one scene with her daughter playing with all like the native kids, immediately the husband comes and takes her away. I just thought that was interesting as well.
I think also like Flora is a little bit representative of Ada's like inner voice, and like kind of like I don't really have a better way to put it right now, but kind of just, I don't want to say like the feminist inside of Ada, that's not how I want to put it, but it's like Flora's very kind of just like that like masculine energy sort of that could be sort of representative because she's kind of the link between Ada and the world communication wise, so she's probably has picked up a lot of her mom's like mannerisms and things like that through their communication, and she could just be kind of like, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Real quick, also with like Ada by the end of the film completely like removes herself from the piano, and throughout the film I kind of saw it as like she slowly removes herself from her daughter. Like they're not as close or talk as much or interact as much as they did at the beginning of the film or within the first couple like scenes. It's definitely like there's a difference by the end.
With Flora? Like
yeah.
between Ada and Flora? Yeah, I can see that because I think like as the film progresses, her and Baines' relationship obviously gets more and more like intense, and then Flora kind of obviously can't be a part of that, and since it's taking up such a large space in Ada's life, Flora, it causes a lot of strife between them as mother and daughter, how like this guy has gotten in between the bond that they had like so closely and so intensely. Like when they were together in the scene where they're cuddling under the hoop skirt, or when they're like just laying in bed together, it's warm in terms of like lighting and coloring. And then when Ada gives Flora the key to give to Baines, I think it's kind of like a turning point, because that whole sequence is very cold, and then obviously Flora takes the key to Stuart, and that whole sequence is very cold, and I think that kind of, I guess, symbolizes that disconnect that they experience towards the end of the film that you just like brought up. But I think that like that's something I just didn't think of before. That's a very real point about the film, is how her relationship with these men kind of affects their relationship as mother and daughter.
I think that the fact that they grew apart just really enforces how the entire colony is sort of trying to get rid of her devices that enabled her to interact with the rest of the world. And that's why it's called the piano, because the piano's all she has in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like I mentioned before, the piano is really a symbol of like her inner liberation, and towards the end, her sexual awakening. Like of course Ada seeks out freedom through music, but I think towards the end she also seeks it out through sexuality and exploring that. And her relationship with the piano, I forget who mentioned it earlier, definitely changes towards the end. Like after throwing it in the ocean, she's kind of starting a new slate, and then I think Laurel mentioned when she plays it's kind of morose and it's kind of sad, but at the end she mentions that she teaches for school children, and it's kind of a happier song that she's playing in that final scene. And I think that like her whole experiences throughout this film kind of changed her relationship with this symbol that was her ticket to the world and her device of communication, and it kind of like it changes it in a really interesting way. That last scene where she plays the piano with the metal finger, I thought was very I think I keep saying the word symbolic, I'm trying to think of another one, but it was very symbolic for the way I think the role that men play in her life, or the role that music plays in her life. So I was wondering if anybody also picked up on that scene where she plays the piano with the metal finger.
I think that like, you know, what struck me most about that scene was the sound of the tapping when the finger hit the piano. And um I think that that is sort of kind of like it's kind of like a sound of acceptance to me a little bit. You know, she just kind of keeps playing with it and it's there and it's not like, but I think it's more so about the way that it's like the tap is kind of unsettling at first, and then you know, she just kind of keeps going and it becomes rhythm, and that could be relational to you know, a number of things in the film.
I think that's like definitely
Think-
a really good way to, oops, sorry. Do you wanna, was someone else good?
Uh,
I, were you gonna
I
have
think
something to
that
say?
yeah, I think the middle finger is really cool because it shows Ada's main character trait I found is that she's able to uh no matter how much the rest of the people around her get her down, she's able to like recover. Um, and the middle finger is just like scar that she's overcome.
Physical representation of that, yeah.
Mhm.
Resilience, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that both of you made that I kind of didn't think about, where like I guess like acceptance and resilience are like really good words to put to it. And when I watched it, I think I can't even remember what I said earlier, but it was something about like the way that she can't experience what she loves without this abuse from George. That like she can't have the freedom of the piano without having the oppression of this sexual contract that they've made, right? And then at the end, she's playing this happy song, but you still hear the tinking of the metal finger on the keys. And it's like this kind of thing where like she will like her whole, trying to word it, like this thing that she loves is always going to be tied to this experience that she's had, but she's choosing rather than to just give up on piano as a whole to kind of use that experience she had to make this like new life for herself, or like this new way of playing music, this new thing that she has to get used to, which I thought was just really kind of, I guess, beautiful as like she was like, it was like a feminist way, or like a feminist lens of like looking at it, where like she's accepting what has happened to her and she's using it as a way in which to like better herself, or like, you know, still experience what she loves despite having, you know, the tapping of the metal against the piano.
Yeah, she's always able to somehow keep the piano by her side throughout the movie. And so it's it you know, the metal finger could first, I think it also represents, you know, something that some people might have that circumstance and stop playing, or some people might have that circumstance and have their whole relationship to the piano change. But it didn't really change anything for her. Like, well, you know, but like what, like she at the end of the movie, she's playing the piano, she's playing a happy song. So yeah. Does any of you guys have any like closing questions or comments?
No, I feel like I hit every point that I had felt was important to bring up about the film.
Yeah, me too. I think I thoroughly covered every note that I had. All right, so if no one has any closing comments, either like about what they thought about the movie or whatever, I think now would be a good time to wrap up. I think we had a really good talk, and I will see you guys next week to talk about our next film.
Thank you. See you next
Bye.
week.